And now it's time to go back in time to perhaps reestablish the Soviet Union-style economic bloc with this newest of new entities that's going to make a big splash in the 21st century called the Eurasian Economic Union. The EEU for short, and I guess they could just call it the Eurasian Union, but then its acronym would be EU, just like the European Union is EU. That'd be all confusing. And what's the difference between Europe and Eurasia anyway? I mean, isn't Europe a continent? Wait a minute, isn't Eurasia a continent? Yeah, good questions all. Depends on what geography you learned when you were a kid. But here's what you need to learn about the Eurasian Union. The word itself, Eurasian, spanning from Europe to Asia. And what's right in the middle of that actually spans physically from Europe to Asia? Russia. And this is certainly a Russian device to form an economic union, yes, but perhaps a whole bunch more politically, possibly militarily, possibly fiscally, possibly everything. This one will go down. This is why you need to go ahead and learn it now. It's still kind of new. It's officially only going to go into real life action on January 1st of 2015, but it's already in movement. It's already going to happen, and it will affect the events of the 21st century for better or for worse. It's that big of a deal, and it's one you've never even heard about. What is the deal then? It is an economic union, like so many others we've talked about, supposedly about free trade and facilitating and promoting trade across borders of sovereign states. And it was established by treaty on May in 2014. Hey, that's not that long ago. And between three countries, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Mother Russia. It was the next step and one of the final steps after they've been building this kind of customs union free trade area for years already, maybe decades. So while I say it's kind of new, it's been in formation since the dissolution of the USSR back in 1991. It's coming to fruition and reality again right now in 2014 or 2015. And by that I mean in January 1, it's supposed to be officially a political / economic Eurasian Union that will be established, recognized with letterhead, the whole 9 yards. That's if the treaty is signed by the leaders of all three states, and I believe it already has. Know this, for starters, this Eurasian Economic Union has sought to follow the model of the European Union, meaning that, yes, they're facilitating free trade. That's actually one of the more minimal things it aspires to be. It does want something closer to political integration on the level of the European Union, with free movements of people, organized policy within or among the sovereign states that are in the club, and perhaps a whole lot more. For right this second, this Eurasian Economic Union is all about the free movement of goods, services, capital, and workforce across all states. They're also conducting coordinated or common policies in key sectors of their economies, namely energy. That's a big deal for these players. Virtually all heavy industry, agriculture, transport, even communications. So already you're at a point of, this ain't no NAFTA. Okay, they're coordinating policies between sovereign states. That's more like the European Union. The free movement of peoples is the big one too. Okay, that's very much like the European Union and unlike other trade blocs that we've talked about. And that will go into effect Jan 1. So Jan 1, you can walk from Belarus through Russia to Kazakhstan, and all you got to do is flash your passport that you are from that member state, and you can do whatever you want to. I'm assuming even work, because they've called it freedom of movement of workforce. So you can go get a job in Kazakhstan or in Siberia, because who doesn't want to do that? Now, that's what it is so far. Some think it perhaps should be a lot more. Perhaps it should be more full political integration, and perhaps more military integration. I wonder who thinks that. Probably one Vladimir Putin and his ilk. But who knows what the lesser players here really think. Certainly Mother Russia is pushing for something getting closer to the old school Soviet Union. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, by the way, okay? They're saying the EU, in a sense, is kind of what Soviet Union was, except they don't eat beets every day and drink vodka. You could talk about political and economic integration of the EU as being not terribly dissimilar to Soviet Russia without all the communist baggage. Other powers, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and others that are likely to join, who knows how far they want to take it, but certainly Vlad the man Putin and his folks want to push the Russian influence out as much as they can and perhaps, again, rebuild some sort of a network, economic, political, and possibly more. And having said that, it would seem, since this is so new, and I said it's just now getting ready to take effect, it seems so new and so modern, it's being pushed so hard right this second by Vladimir Putin and Mother Russia, that we must all assume here in Team West that it's all the brainchild of Vladimir. Putin is doing all of this. And you would be assuming wrong. Because even though Vladimir Putin is famously quoted as saying that the breakup of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century because it left millions of ethnically Russian peoples outside of the sovereign state called Russia. He did say that. So again, outsiders might think, oh, well, this whole integration thing, this Eurasian Economic Union is Putin trying to reestablish the Soviet Union. And that's not necessarily a good assumption. He's pushing hard for it, but economic integration between the old sub-states of the Soviet Union has been happening ever since the breakup of the Soviet Union. And for those of you who don't know anything about this, the Soviet Union lost the Cold War and fell apart geopolitically in 1991. And it used to be a single sovereign state called the Soviet Union, USSR, had a seat at the United Nations. And with the stroke of a pen, it dissolved itself and became 15 sovereign states that we recognize in today's world. All of the Central Asian states, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, this place called Ukraine, and Russia, 15 new states. That was at the stroke of a pen in 1991. But all of these areas I just mentioned up to that point were part of a singular economic system. And you can't just undo that overnight. You can't just say, oh, well, we're Ukraine now and we hate you, Russia, so we have no economic ties whatsoever. Remember, Russia was the center of the Soviet Union and it controlled all economic policy. It built all the railroads and all the factories and all this and moved wheat from over here and iron ore from over there and beets from over there and vodka to here and tractors to here. So they couldn't just undo that overnight. And very quickly, even after the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, there were already leaders of some of these states going, well, we have to keep working together. And Russia was saying, dudes, we have to keep working together. There's not a real choice here. If you want the supply chains to continue to go, we have to work together. So in 1994, they formed up something which probably none of you even know about called the Commonwealth of Independent States. And it was, again, mostly economic driven, a kind of coordinating policy of this group to try to smooth over the transition process of all of these entities becoming sovereign states with their own economies and their own roads and their own railroads and stuff like that. So this isn't a new idea, and it's not Vladimir Putin's personal idea. But it certainly has been pushed harder and faster in the decade since Putin took office than before it. And I don't think it's that much of a stretch of the imagination to see Putin using this as a vehicle to rebuild Russian power at the center, but also to its periphery. These are all areas that used to be part of the Soviet Union that Russia used to have a lot of control over. And he is just now bringing this kind of 2 decades later saying, hey, well, let's get the old club back together again. And you know what? It's going to be economically conducive for you. We don't have to call it the Soviet Union. Let's call it the Eurasian Union, like European Union. See how this is all working? So is it a tool for reuniting the Russian peoples as well? Because remember, there are ethnically Russian peoples in Kazakhstan, in Estonia, in Ukraine. Is this a subtle way of starting to pull all of these entities back under an economic umbrella that might become a lot more, pulling the Russian peeps back to Mother Russia homeland? A rebuilding of USSR? Could be. Maybe. Possibly. But it certainly is a device that is reestablishing Russian influence across the periphery, if not outright empire building, according to how you want to interpret the moves of Vladimir Putin's Russia right now in Ukraine, in Central Asia, and other places. It certainly, whether you like the guy or not, it certainly is an alternative economy or economic motive, an alternative economic bloc from the EU, from Team West. And let's just call a spade here. I do want you to know this. This is really what this whole Ukrainian situation is all about. I've been meaning to do a separate podcast just on this, but Russia's intervention in Ukraine, and really, some say bullying, some say motivating, some say interfering, some say trying to convince, whatever you want to call Russia's moves in Ukraine, it's really about this union. Russia wants to pull back in folks, ethnically Russian folks, but also parts of its old empire, to work with it and not run away and join Team West. And so they have not, up to this point in history, had a real alternative. So Estonia joined the EU and NATO. Latvia joined the EU. Georgia was trying to get into the EU. And all Russia could do up to that point was watch it happen. And now Vladimir Putin's saying, no. If you guys want an economic union, we got one of them. See? And Ukraine, you don't want to go to Team West. Come on back to Mother Russia. And we can convince you by making your life miserable until you do join our team instead of their team. Is that starting to make just a little bit of sense about what this Eurasian Economic Union is about? There definitely is political aspirations and motivations by the Russian side. There's no doubt. There's no sense denying that. I'm not sure that Vladimir Putin would deny it. But at its core, it is an economic union that might perhaps make more sense to people in the Russian hood, or I should say in the Eurasian hood. That, hey, Russia's a big economy, and we should work together with them more. They used to buy all our stuff because it used to be the Soviet Union, and we could work together more. We could influence each other in a more positive light. Certainly, that's what Vladimir Putin is thinking. He doesn't have the negative spin that all the outsiders do. He's saying, look, I'm trying to make all you people richer. You don't have to run off to the European Union and join up on that team. We can do this stuff here. And you're closer to here anyway, and you have historic, cultural, and economic ties to this part of the planet, not to that part. And Vladimir Putin would also be the one to point out, BTW, we sell hell tons of our stuff to China. See, it's the Eurasian Union and Asia, the part on the other side of Eurasia, that's where the action is. It's over there. So come on, Ukraine. Come on, Kazakhstan. Get with our club because we are doing a lot of business with Japan and China and South Korea. And you know what? That's true, and that makes a bit of economic sense. Why do you think the U.S. and some of its allies are so keen on getting the TPP pushed through? Because Asia is the epicenter of the world economy now. And Vladimir Putin is rightfully saying, hey, we should join forces in our bloc to facilitate that. Who cares about the European Union anymore? They're all going in recession and their population's dwindling. We need to look to the future. That is a very solid argument for Vlad the man to be making about his Eurasian Economic Union. But I've already gone over time, so let me try to wrap up quickly with this. Russian President Vladimir Putin has stated his goal was to enlarge the customs union to all post-Soviet states, except the Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So he's already not even inviting them. He's like, nope, because they're in NATO and they're in the EU, and he's given up on them. However, there are other former parts of the Soviet Union, now sovereign states, that they've all been invited, including Ukraine. And Armenia has already said they want in. Armenia is slated to join. Kyrgyzstan has said, yes, we want in too. We'd like to join. Tajikistan, likely to join. It still needs some convincing. However, there are those former Soviet republics who say, no. No thanks. Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia have all been invited to join this Eurasian Economic Union. And they also have been invited to join the European Union. All three, of course, if you follow current events at all, you know that all three have accepted at least the talking points of getting into the European Union, not the Eurasian Union. Having said that, there are parts of these areas, namely a place called Transnistria that's within Moldova, the Republic of Donetsk, which is part of eastern Ukraine, which is likely to be ripped away from Ukraine, and South Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia. All of those sub-areas of Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, respectively, have said they want into the Eurasian Union. So you have parts of sovereign states that are wanting to go one way, while the governments of those sovereign states want to go to the European Union. That's why this is such a crazy mess and such a big deal, and why I say you got to know this group, because it's impacting a lot in major world regions across the entire Eurasian continent. Who probably will definitely never join? Moldova, I can't see it. I'm not even sure why Russia would want them in. Uzbekistan has said, nope, don't think so. We had our run with the Soviet Union, we're done. Turkmenistan is largely in the same boat. They've all said, niet. No thanks. Georgia is extremely unlikely to join since Russia invaded them back in 2008 and pulled away those areas called South Ossetia and Abkhazia who want to join the Eurasian Union. So Georgia currently is like, oh no, we don't think so. That'd be getting pulled back into the lion's den. However, presidents come and go. So the current leadership of Georgia says no way, but we don't know who will take over Georgia in 5 or 10 years, so it's possible. Mostly they want to join the European Union right now, but we'll see. This whole Ukrainian situation may be the linchpin that changes everybody's mind. If they are coerced by force or by economic motivation to join Vladimir Putin's Eurasian Economic Union, if Ukraine goes, Georgia might too. Moldova might too. Uzbekistan might too. If the Russians continue to put tremendous pressure on them and it scares the sweet bejesus out of all other states that have ethnic Russian people in them, you might see a lot more people say, you know what? It's in our political interest to go ahead and join this Eurasian Union. Let's just do it. So Ukraine continues to be the linchpin, and it actually continues to be why the Russians are so adamant about Ukraine joining their club and not the European Union. Ukraine actually has a fairly big economy if they can ever get it back on track. Probably second only to Russia in this whole grouping of countries. Ukraine has the second biggest military in this Eurasian Union invited group after Russia. So that's why Ukraine's such a big deal. Strategically and economically and politically, it's quite important to this Eurasian Economic Union's success, which is why it's being fought over so badly, being pushed so hard by Vladimir Putin. I really don't think that Vladimir Putin's Russia wants to own Ukraine. They don't. They don't want to invade and take it over politically. They are just continue to increase the pressure to convince Ukraine that, you know what, you want to keep your sovereignty, and we'll let you keep your sovereignty as long as you join our club. Does that make a little bit of sense? All right. Hope so. So the end game for this is that Putin's plan for the Eurasian Customs Union, which is now turning into the Eurasian Economic Union, is to grow this, whatever it is, into a powerful supranationalist union of sovereign states very similar in nature to the European Union, uniting economies, legal systems, customs services, passport systems, possibly a single monetary unit, a singular currency, and possibly military capabilities in the future to form this bigger union that's a bridge between Europe and Asia, one that will rival the European Union itself, counter U.S. influence, actually counter even Indian influence in Central Asia and Eurasia, possibly even countering Chinese influence in Central Asia. Remember, Russia used to control all this, and now there's these other powers that are vying to get in there. So a strong Russia wants a stronger Eurasian Union, of which they're the center of, to fend off the European Union, to fend off the United States, possibly fend off even India and China a little bit. And you know what? It doesn't hurt that it totally pisses off Team West in the process. That's the Eurasian Economic Union, one to watch this entire century.